Thanks, everyone. I am so super excited. Those of you who know me, I wear my heart on my sleeve and my excitement there as well. Why am I excited? Because we've got a robust panel that stems across the customer journey, basically up until you get to loan underwriting. And so identity first lending. Before we get started on what this is, I just want to take a moment and give you 4 quotes that was said already this morning through different panels or through different discussions, because I think it really brings home what identity first lending is and why and the importance. So Scott said this morning that the process is the same from the 1950s in the dealerships. Let's think about that. Pause that, because I will bring that back as to why that's important and why when I first came on with David Fry and Paays, I had no idea what I was up against. So hold that thought. KYC and IDV, so Victoria said this, would have axed it right away. So that was in reference to one of the investigations that they did, that if there would have been IDV and KYC at the very beginning, one might assume, I will make the assumption, that the crime would not have evolved to the extent that it did. Janet Minerva said, IDV, it's at your front door, right? Let's think about that. Identity verification is at the very front of the door. So when the consumer comes in the dealership, or when the consumer acts or engages online with the dealership, it's at the front door. And then finally, be where the consumers are. Where are the consumers? The consumers are at the front door. Hence, let's talk about identity first approach, or identity first lending. What is it? So again, if we think about what the processes are back in the 1950s, identity first lending is really ensuring that the person who is being on the loan or driving that piece of metal off the lot or being delivered to their driveway is actually the person that they say they are. It's critically important to do it at the very beginning, not at the time of funding or approval, but at the very beginning when that first interaction with that consumer is had at the dealership, again, whether in person or virtual. So turning the processes sort of onto its head, the traditional process of lending at dealerships, David Fry likes to say that dealerships are keeping fax machines and photocopiers in business. And I think there's some truth to that as well. So let's turn it on its head. I'd like to introduce my panelists here, which again, I'm so excited about. Kevin Andrews, CEO, President, Auto One Group. He represents investment banking and leasing. Zyra is from RBC on the automotive side. So we've got actually the lenders on the panel. We'll talk about what is happening from them from an identity first standpoint. And then we have Jonah, senior advisor to Pioneer Group. And we'll talk about real life situations where, in working in partnership and together, the Pioneer dealership or the Pioneer Group actually, and all the dealerships that are under them have seen great success by invoking the identity first lending concept. So let's get started. In keeping with the description of this session, I want to talk about key themes here. One is, what is the approach of identity first lending that we're all using? Number 2 is talking about dealer OEM captive lender trust and what that looks like. I want to talk about real world examples that have happened with all 3 of these organizations and businesses. And then finally, I want to talk about what you can do within your respective organizations, learning from the panel here on how they instituted change within their own organizations to bring identity first approach or identity first lending to the forefront. So Zyra, we'll start with you. Looking at what are some of the challenges that RBC faces in identifying fraudulent applicants before or after funding?
Thanks, Anne-Marie, and thank you, CLA, for the invitation. Just so everybody knows, my LinkedIn has never had this much action, so thank you for taking it out of dormancy. But really, the challenges that we're facing is essentially the fact that applications and applicants look good until they're not. And so that seamless transaction of purchasing a vehicle, financing that vehicle, doing it all in one smooth transaction in a short period of time is really key critical. And how do we do that? Well, it's based on the dealer-lender relationship. And so if that trust is there, then that transaction becomes that seamless and smooth, quick approval to yes. So, lenders, we're not in front of the consumers. We're not in front of the car buyers. And so we rely on, the dealerships to do the due diligence on our behalf. And so, as lenders, we have these robust protocols, we have these robust processes and strategies to ensure that we're able to detect fraud at its source. To expect those same protocols to happen at the dealership is impossible. Right? Like, could you imagine what the training would be like at the dealerships if they were to implement what lenders have? And so that's really the challenge, is making sure that we maintain that balance of speed to decisioning while being really having robust protocols to detect fraud.
I think that's a good segue. Jonah, over to you. From a dealership standpoint, talk to us about identifying the consumer and maybe some of the wins and the challenges maybe that you've had, given, what Zyra has just said from her perspective in lending.
Yeah, for sure. And again, everyone, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here in Toronto with all of you. I came in early this morning, 2 a.m., so I'm a little tired, but life of a new dad with a 14-month-old. Pioneer Auto Group, we have over 14 dealerships in the Vancouver market. And I'm excited to discuss today some of the examples as to one of the ways we've been able to fight fraud in our market. But to talk a little bit about our implementation on the system is exciting because our entire group is comprised of pre-owned dealerships. We have 3 OEM stores. We have, within our arsenal, we produce just over $350 million a year in sales. But we've been a target of heavy fraud, and we made some major changes over the last 12 months, which has resulted in us actually fighting and ensuring that we were protected over $350,000 in fraud losses.
Awesome. And Kevin, you bring a different perspective from an investment banking and leasing standpoint. Can you give us some insights as to, your experiences on both sides of your business?
Sure. So I guess maybe some of you don't know, the other side of the business is we fund leasing companies across Canada, have for a very long time. So in that side, we look at the perspective of our customers. And so, we provide funding to leasing companies on a securitization basis. So we buy the paper from them and we rely on them to do their due diligence just like a bank would. But sometimes, we have to not rely on them. And, there are certain circumstances you see this paper flow through. And since the financial recession, in order for us to continue to fund, we had to put up an awful lot of capital into these trusts that we use. And so that now means I'm at risk. And if I'm at risk, I have certain criteria to make. And if the leasing companies that we fund don't want to do identity first, along with all kinds of other checks and requirements, then I won't fund them. So unlike the bank, I will take a hammer and I will say, you either do this or we're not funding you anymore, because it's just as much my money at risk as it is your capital. Now, and that's simple for me to do, and I do it, and we have, and it's been successful, and they now all pull a line. On our own operation, Auto One obviously is a direct leasing company, lots of consumer, all kinds of issues with fraud over the years. And, and that was an easy decision. I mean, we pulled the trigger immediately the second we were able to get ID verification. We put it up number one. Our system allows us to do this. Everybody's trained that way. It doesn't matter where that deal comes from. If it comes through a broker network, it gets extra eyes, of course. But, it's still, why spend hours looking at a deal if you can kick it out in 5 seconds with ID verification? So that's immediately what we do. And in fact, we're now in the process of putting out an app. Got an app for that. So, you're not going to be able to open the app without ID verification. So for me, it's relatively straightforward. I mean, I'm sure lots of people here have a Nexus pass, and so you walk through to the U.S. if you still want to go there. It takes a second. You walk up to the camera now, and they boop your picture. You walk through, and they say, "Hi, Kevin. Have a nice day. See you next week." And it's great. Like, what's the big deal? Pretty straightforward.
So I love that, right? Because we've heard this morning that in some of the conversations that we've had with some of our lender partners and even dealerships is, we can't put any type of more friction into the dealerships because the F&I manager or the salespeople won't like it. And if they don't like it, they're going to go to the next lender. And so I want to talk, Kevin, maybe start with you because you have the big hammer. You said everyone needs to do it. I can use some swear words, but I won't. And so you go ahead and use the swear words. Talk to us a little bit about how the process of doing that. And then Jonah and Zyra, I would love to hear your perspectives as well, because again, like I said, there's this facade that, we can't do this because we're going to invoke friction on the consumer. Well, guess what? We as consumers are used to taking selfies, right? In our, to open up my camera, I'm doing it. You'll see me doing it throughout the session. So it's not the consumers. We don't want to invoke, or they don't want to invoke friction on the dealerships. And so can you talk about that?
Sure. And it's not the consumer. It really isn't. The consumer's happy to do this all day long. They had no problem. For us, it's our customer. It's our leasing customers. They don't want the hassle for doing it. And while, as I said, at the end of the day, it's if you want funding, whether it's from me or from a bank, and then if, the bank's lending you $20, $30, $40 million, they should be asking for the same things that I ask for. And it's, here we go. It's the only way to protect yourself. You have to do it. And, when we get pushback, that's one phone call to the owner, and it's just like, sorry, this is the way it's going to be. And I don't care that it's going to cost you 20 cents to check some guy's ID. It's the same way we pretty much require GPS units in all the cars now, because they're stolen all over the place. You can't look 2 seconds and the car is gone. And we got to get them back because it's insurance, it's issues, it's all kinds of things. So, we now require anything. I think it's over $80,000 minimum has to have a GPS unit in it. Same kind of issues.
Hence, we heard from Carl this morning and his neighbor, right, getting the Land Rover stolen. So, Jonah, what about you? What's your experience?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about 50 years or 1950s. Business hasn't really changed. Pioneer Auto Group, we have over 300 individuals in our organization, over 100 managers. And when we implemented this new process into our daily activities, it was very complex to take a lot of financial services managers that knew exactly everything on KYC and they're business managers, so they know exactly what to do. They're the professionals, and it only took one example of one quote unquote pro F&I manager for a fraud to slip through the crack, where this system and to be able to take people in our organization saying no, we don't want to do this. Not only is it going to be a waste of our time, our customers don't want to deal with it. We're going to lose deals. We're going to leave, blah, 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 blah. Now we're in a position where if this is not done in the process, the financial services manager or the sales or even the general managers for their stores aren't going to be commissioned if this is not completed. It's essentially a deficiency. And through that process, like I said earlier, we have found by adding this into our step, we have saved over $350,000 in fraud-related chargebacks or preventable chargebacks.
Yeah, I will comment that, modern day problems need modern day solutions. Like it's the way fraud is being perpetrated today is not the same way it was being perpetrated even 10 years ago. And so, when it came to making sure that there is additional verification at point of contact, first point of contact, I should say. We have support from our senior leaders because we understand how fraud is being, perpetuated into our ecosystem, impacting lenders, dealers. The relationship is eroding. Making sure that we have support from the portals. It is a collective goal that we must have, and so we need to pivot and be nimble in solving these problems. The problem with fraud is that it's constantly evolving. And so we always feel like we need to be a step ahead. But in actual, in reality, we're finding it months later of how the, criminal organizations are infiltrating our ecosystem. So we really need to be hyper-focused in how we're solving for the problem, but we need to know the problem first.
Yeah, a little bit of a real life story. So David and I were, we've been working with RBC for about 2 years. And so we were around the boardroom and we were talking about a certain dealership group and who had instituted some, IDV technology. And somebody at RBC at the table said, that's why their losses have significantly decreased. And so I think to your point, it's, this communication between what the dealership groups are doing and that, at the end of the day, the lenders are feeling it in a positive manner. And so real life situation here. I think that blends nicely into, we talk a lot about process and technology and that you can't have one without the other. You can't have technology without process around the technology, and you can't have process without the technology, if actually that makes sense. But before you define what technology you need, and then therefore the processes you need to implement the technology or support the technology, someone has to identify that there's a problem. And so in all three of your cases, I think it's really interesting, and not often do we actually hear about how do we get the business cases forward? How do we, internally within our own organizations, give rise to there is a problem. And oh, by the way, now there's technology, and here's our internal processes that need to be had to support that technology in order to mitigate the problem. And so, Kevin, I'll start with you. In your experiences, in your portfolios, how do your teams, or what do you expect from your teams to identify, first of all, that there's a problem before they come to you to say, we need a big fat check to, support the operational processes around the technology, the integrations, and all that good stuff. And so talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, we're fairly tech forward for a relatively small leasing company, mostly because of Rosman. But every time we look at a process, and we look at lots of them, and ID obviously was kind of a, hate to say it, is a no-brainer. I mean, it was just, put this into the process immediately. What's it going to do? And it was fairly straightforward for us to set up. We get broker deals come through, and the first thing that happens is they get a link sent to them, and it's an ID link. And that's the first thing you do. I'm not looking at your application until the ID is done, period. And, is that an expense? That was just easy. Honestly, I don't even know if that cost us anything to do. but that's just one step in the process. I mean, and, when we look at the rest of those, then the processes that have to be done, and it goes back to this saving $350,000. I mean, we've all had fraud losses. Every year something happens, and it's always fraud, and it's always, how did that happen? When should we, how do we fix this? And how, what's the value to fix it? There's an easy number to put on it. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. And so, it's pretty much always worth it. If you've got to hire a programmer to come in and to do something, then it's there's generally, the reward is certainly worth the cost. So always.
Zyra, from your standpoint.
Yeah, I think, again, the support, as I mentioned, it's unwavering. We know that there's a problem. We need to solve for it. I think the complexity lies in integrating these new tools into existing systems and making sure that it minimizes the friction with our partner dealers. So having the tools is great, but ensuring that it works seamlessly with existing processes, existing technologies, that's where we have to make sure that, okay, the process that we have works. If we're going to be adding this enhancement, this upgrade, can we do it seamlessly, and how does it impact our dealers? So making sure that we have that balance of not adding friction and keeping again that approval swift and.
Well, I will say that your process has got to be way harder than mine.
Yeah, noted.
We have a dealer portal, and we're able to program that, add in all the various requirements that we think work perfectly and easily for a seamless transaction right through the get-go. And so us investing in that, spending money on that to get it to work properly and get it in seamless, it's got to be 1,000 times, for what you'd have to spend.
Understood.
Now, Kevin, we can talk a little bit about targeting and being a target of fraud as well. Obviously, you have a couple retail stores. The leasing portfolio is big for you. Unlike us, we have pretty much all retail stores. How do you find if any of your retail stores are a target or were a target of fraud before implementing a new process?
Hey, wait a second. I think I'm the moderator, Jonah.
Who's asking the question here?
Going off script, man.
Yeah, well, you know what? I think along with Paays, and as I said, the Nexus program, we've got a camera now that sits up right there, and as you walk into the showroom, and it's boom, it takes a picture, it goes through the ID, and we're good. Not really, but
Yeah,
just in case you're
And he
wondering.
drops the mic.
yeah. I feel since we've implemented the process and just talking to another fellow dealer, it's been fantastic to see the decrease in the target attempts that has happened to the organization in the beginning. And again, which is why I'm so passionate to be here to discuss this. It was a huge issue. Now we've, taken 2 to 3 fraud attempts a week to 0 now, which is one of the reasons why.
Well, but I guess because, our retail operation is not really that big, so, we're not housing thousands of cars like you guys would on that side, so we're not getting the volume of fraudsters in. They come generally through the broker system when we're buying leases and stuff, so it's a little easier for that. Although I will say, we now have to, if we're buying a car in for trade or whatever, we still have to do an ID check on the guy giving us the car for the trade, because you can't trust anyone.
Drop the mic. Jonah, from your perspective. Yeah. From your perspective, please.
Yeah, you know what? Like I said, from my perspective, the way that the industry has shifted in the last, even 12 months from me transitioning from a major corporation into an executive role at a dealership, it is an absolute mandatory process to have this in place for a dealer group like ours. And I'll give you a couple examples. Like what you just said, Kevin, when it comes to trust, one of the biggest things that we have also seen, and again, I have a lot of stories, but we'll just talk real quick about one example. We've seen a lot of people that have been starting to leave Canada. And with that, we have actually found people that have come into a lot of our stores with an ID that looks similar to the individual who's looking to buy a vehicle, but is not that person. In fact, it was someone that had given their ID to a cousin or a friend. And if we hadn't had that process in place with all the changes happening within our country, it would have been a major issue for us.
Talk about, so I love this story, Jonah. Will you talk about, I don't want to give it away. You know the one I'm talking about.
Yeah. The one with the red and blue? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Real interesting story. So the RCMP actually, there was a woman that was wanted for a bunch of fraud crimes. Like I'm talking, I think there was like 5 or 6 that she was wanted for. It was unbelievable. And she'd come into one of the dealerships and was transacting to buy a car, and the financial services manager knew, went along and did the process, and basically got the deal done. Everything was perfectly fine, all approved. And one of the senior financial services managers had reminded him, did you complete your verification? No, we didn't. Well, you need to complete it first. So he completed it. While this customer was driving in a vehicle, he had found out that the ID actually came back and it failed. It was a fraud. And this was a woman that the RCMP had been looking for. Now, luckily, we had given her one of the service vehicles to drive while her new car was being detailed. And we also, like you, had a GPS in it because, again, it's very hard to trust anybody. And the RCMP were able to not only arrest her, but her boyfriend, who had another 7 or 8 charges that he was wanted for. But my conversation with the police, they said, if you hadn't done this, if you haven't done this scan, we would have never found this woman. And it was pretty cool how that saved on that element.
Yeah, I think that brings me back to what Victoria was talking about this morning from Halton, right? So we have a hot 5 minutes left. I want to talk a little bit about, again, Victoria this morning talked about, the prevalence of identity theft and identity fraud as sort of being the underlayer or the cause of a lot of what we're feeling in this room and why we're talking about, or on this panel anyway, identity fraud or identity first lending. Given the macroeconomic climate, which we heard in the first session this morning, and given the threat of a recession coming, I'd like each of you to talk about how you are, or your respective organizations are preparing for that. Because with, macroeconomic, as interest rates increase, as things become more expensive for consumers, the ease by which to perpetrate first-party fraud becomes really easy. And so that falsifying, your income or falsifying information on your application, or it just becomes easier for consumers to tell themselves that it's okay. And so I would expect that identity fraud, identity theft, consumer behavior, right, is going to change. And so what are how are you guys, each of your respective organizations, preparing for what I'm going to say will be an influx of first-party fraud and identity fraud, especially through the automotive industry? Kevin, I'll start with you.
Well, I think we're pretty much already there. I don't know what else we can do on the ID side, but certainly on the actual lending side or the credit adjudication side, we take a lot of care in not only doing the ID. I mean, this is just the first start of the process, really. Once you start pulling up bank account information and things like that, that's when you have to start reviewing everything just a lot more carefully. So for us, getting into this kind of an environment, not dissimilar from COVID, you tighten the belt, you look very carefully, and you check everything twice. So that's us.
Yeah, I think this is a training ground. Never did I think that I would be up here talking about the fraud that we're seeing being a training ground. But if the worst case scenario happens, we do anticipate that fraud will be perpetrated, exponentially. Because desperate times call for desperate measures. And so we have already established, so I'm currently leading a team, a task force at RBC.
The fraud squad.
The fraud squad. You stole my line. We are the fraud squad at RBC, and it's a task force essentially of brilliant individuals who's mandated to just look at fraud, see what's happening, what are the trends, and again, it's just a training ground. Once we start implementing the various strategies that we have in place, we're gonna be ready to deploy them just in time. But we can't, rest on our laurels because we're really anticipating worst case scenario. And so I think that we're laying a great foundation, but we can't do this alone. It's not an RBC problem. It is all hands on deck, and we need an industry standard to make sure that we protect each other, because there won't be an industry if that happens, right? And so it's an existential threat, and again, it is a collective goal that we all have to address.
That's well said. And like you said, we need to protect each other. When it comes to our bank partners, with the economic uncertainty, with things that are happening in our country from what we had talked about earlier, we all need to be in it for and help each other out. And again, how Pioneer Auto Group is preparing for these uncertain times is again, making sure we're fully transparent with our lender partners, ensuring that we're transparent with our customers, explaining why we're doing a bit more background check, why we're doing ID verification, or even potentially other forms of verification to confirm bank statements, etc. And we truly are pioneering this in Canada, and I'm really happy to say that that we are one of the larger dealer groups in Canada with this program fully in place And I'm proud to say it's not going away. And I really hope that a lot of the lenders in here and any other dealers in here can come up to me and chat about some of the successes or have any questions. I'd love to share some of more stories of how this has changed our organization.
I love this. Thanks so much. So that concludes, but I'll leave you with one thing. First of all, thank you, all three of you. You guys know how excited I was to bring you up on this panel and share experiences. So thank you for being candid and for not leaving me in the dust of forgetting some of my questions. I'll leave you with this. I want everybody to think about this. Fraud is the result of poor identity management. And if you think about that from a customer standpoint, from your business standpoint, from a consumer standpoint, and even from you as a person standpoint, it makes sense. So let's move the identity verification up to the front. Again, where the consumer is meeting either face-to-face or non-face-to-face, so that downstream, when the car or the automobile or leaves the lot, everybody is safe and we're in a trusted ecosystem. Thank you and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.